The engine of my Type 97 Kaiha was a low, steady heartbeat in the belly of the beast. Through the commander's slit, the world was a narrow, bruised slice of twilight over Hunan province. The air, thick with the ghosts of cordite and diesel, carried the distant, rhythmic cough of artillery, a lull. In the war, silence is never peace. It is merely the drawing of a breath before the next scream. Inside the turret, the smell of hot metal and my crewmate's sweat was a familiar cage. I was Tanaka Hiroshi, 31 years old, formerly of the Kyoto Prefectural Police, now commander of this 10-ton steel precinct. Before the war, my world was one of carefully observed details. The scuff mark on a tatami mat, the tremor in a liar's voice, the faint scent of sake on a morning collar. I hunted disorder. Here the disorder was absolute, a canvas of chaos splashed with fire and mud, yet my old instincts remained. I saw the battlefield as an enormous, unfolding crime scene. The trajectory of a shell was evidence. The position of a corpse told a story. My duty, I believed, was the same as it had ever been, to impose order on a world spiraling into madness, to uphold the pure, unassailable will of the Emperor. I saw this war as the grandest police action in history. Patrol assignment commander, crackled the voice of Kenji, my driver, his farm boy accent a thin reed against the engine's thrum. Rear guard, sergeant's orders. Sweep the supply route west of the river. A routine task, a milk run. The real fight was in the guts of Changde, where our infantry were clawing their way through the city street by bloody street. Our job was to ensure the arteries feeding that fight remained clear. Simple, but in my line of work, nothing is ever simple. We lurched into motion, the tracks chewing at the wounded earth. I scanned the landscape, my eyes tracing the lines of the terrain, committing them to memory. It was a habit from my detective days, mapping out a neighborhood before a raid. The shattered trees, the skeletal remains of a peasant's hut, the curve of the muddy riverbank, all filed away. Precision is the enemy of chaos. An hour into the patrol, I saw the first anomaly. A set of tire tracks, deeper than they should be, veering off the main supply road toward a cluster of derelict buildings near an old temple. They were from one of our own Isuzu trucks, but the tread pattern was overlaid with a second, fainter set. The same truck, two passes, one heavy, one light, leaving full, returning empty, or the other way around. It was a detail anyone else would dismiss, a driver taking a shortcut perhaps, but it was a deviation from the pattern. It was a question without an answer, and I've always hated those. Kenji, I said into the throat mic, my voice calm, betraying none of the sudden sharpness in my thoughts. Pull over by that bombed-out shrine ahead. I want to check something. Sir. Sergeant Watanabe said to stick to the main route. We are sticking to it. I'm just stretching my legs. The lie was a small, necessary tool. The tank hissed to a halt. I pushed open the heavy cupola hatch and climbed out, the cold, damp air a shock after the stale warmth of the turret. The silence here was different, deeper. The artillery was a muffled heartbeat now, distant and unreal. The only sound was the wind whispering through the broken roof tiles of the temple. I drew my Nambu pistol, the cold steel a familiar weight in my hand. It felt less like a soldier's weapon and more like my old service sidearm. I was on my beat again. I followed the tracks on foot, my boots sinking into the soft mud. They led directly to the back of the largest of the ruined buildings, a former storehouse. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Not the expected scent of dust and decay, but something else. A cloying, sickly sweet aroma like burnt sugar and opium poppies. I knew that smell. I'd raided dens in the Jin district that reeked of it. It was the smell of rot. The smell of dishonor. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. Stacked against the far wall were dozens of wooden crates. They were not army issue. These were smaller, cruder. I knelt beside one and pried at the lid with my bayonet. It splintered open. Inside, nestled in straw, were not bandages or bullets or rice, but bricks of dark, sticky opium, a fortune's worth, enough to poison a city. Every detail seared itself into my mind. The stenciling on the side of the crates, a merchant's mark from Shanghai. The sheer quantity, the calculated effort to hide it here, miles from the frontline chaos but directly on the supply route. The pieces clicked into place with the cold, sickening finality of a cell door locking. The nervous quartermaster I'd seen yesterday, Corporal Maury, who wouldn't meet my eye. The unusually frequent supply runs to this supposedly quiet sector. The heavy truck going in, the light truck coming out. This wasn't the enemy. This was us. Elements of our own supply chain, our own army, were engaged in criminal trafficking. In the middle of the most critical battle of the year, while men were dying for a few more feet of ground in Changde, others were enriching themselves, spreading poison. They were undermining the very foundation of our mission. This was not order. This was a cancer growing in the bone marrow of the Imperial Army. I stood there in the silence of that profane storeroom, the weight of my discovery pressing down on me, heavier than my tank. My duty was clear. As a police officer, as a servant of the Emperor, my path was absolute. I had to document the evidence, identify the conspirators, and file a report with the Kenpeitai. Justice had to be served. The rot had to be cut out, no matter how painful. But then the other part of me, the tank commander, took over. I thought of my crew, of the 8th Regiment. A full-blown investigation here now, it would shatter our unit's cohesion. It would mean interrogations, arrests, shame. It would disrupt the flow of ammunition and medicine to the men bleeding in the city. How many would die because a supply convoy was halted for an investigation? The scandal would bring dishonor upon our entire division, a stain that could never be washed away. My greatest fear, a catastrophic failure of duty leading to public disgrace, was suddenly before me, a two-headed serpent. To report this crime was my duty to the law and the Emperor. It was the policeman's way. But to remain silent, to focus on the battle at hand, was my duty to the men who trusted me, to the immediate, desperate reality of the war. That was the soldier's way. Both paths led to a failure of duty. One would sacrifice men on the battlefield for a principle of justice. The other would sacrifice justice for the sake of the battle. I felt a profound loss of control, the ground crumbling beneath my feet. This wasn't a clean fight against a foreign enemy. This was a dirty, internal war, and I was standing at its silent epicenter. The distant crump of artillery fire seemed to pull me back to the world. I looked from the opium back to the darkened doorway. What was the greater disorder? The enemy we could see and shoot, or the one we could not? Slowly, methodically, I pushed the lid back onto the crate. I used the butt of my pistol to hammer it down, the sound echoing like gunshots in the silent room. I wiped my prints from the wood, a useless, instinctive gesture. A policeman covering his tracks. I backed out of the building, pulling the door shut, leaving the secret festering in the dark. I walked back to the tank, each step heavy. The mud felt like it was trying to pull me down into the earth. I climbed back into my steel box, sealing the hatch behind me. The familiar smell of the turret felt different now, tainted. "Anything, Commander?" Kenji's voice asked, innocent and trusting. I cleared my throat. The word felt like swallowing glass. "Nothing, just ghosts. Let's get back to the route." We moved on. The battle for Changde would rage for weeks more. I would fight, I would kill, I would command my men and follow my orders. But the clarity was gone. My pristine belief in our mission, in the war as a righteous extension of law and order, had been shattered in that dusty, quiet storeroom. I learned that day that the enemy is not always on the other side of the wire. Sometimes the most dangerous rot is the one you carry inside your own lines, a quiet poison that corrupts everything it touches. The war for China was fought with steel, but the war for my own soul was fought and lost in silence. These memories are heavy, but they must be shared. Subscribe to ensure these stories are never forgotten.